I spend much of my professional life researching the evolution of new business models in the life sciences industry. Unsurprisingly, I often see parallels between business and biology that are both academically interesting and practically useful. But recent comments by Joe Jimenez, the CEO of Novartis, made me think of one particularly strong correspondence between the history of life's evolution on Earth and the current wave of change that is sweeping across our industry. And since that analogy allows us to draw important lessons, let me explain what it is and what it can tell us about how to ensure that our own businesses survive and thrive. In industry evolution, business models are the equivalent of species, with each firm occupying a slot in a taxonomy of business models. Looking at our industry, it's striking that for the past few decades there have been relatively few distinct new species. So although every firm looks unique at a detailed level, most life science companies can be categorized into one of a few basic types: research-based, generic, biotechs, for example. There are differences within these groups, of course, but each type shares business model fundamentals, and the categories have remained pretty static for decades now. Those of you who've moved between companies of different types will recognize this. This small number of models brings to mind a period in Earth's history beginning about 542 million years ago, in which both the number of species and their diversity leapt suddenly. For example, most major animal groups appeared at this time. Evolutionary biologists ponder over this sudden non-linear change and give three connected explanations for it: environmental change, ecological gaps, and niche creation. To simplify a complicated, fascinating story, changes in the environment led to the demise of older life forms and created gaps for new ones to fill. These new forms interacted with the environment to shape the habitat for themselves and for other species. And the result was a huge, beautiful flowering of life that we now call the Cambrian explosion. In a relatively short period of time, geologically speaking, life on planet Earth blossomed and changed beyond all recognition. So, back to the life sciences industry and my research, which points to our very own Cambrian explosion in our industry. So far in my research, I've identified the emergence of something like 26 new business models, and as in biology, these many different forms all represent evolutionary choices about the best way to survive in a competitive environment. The analogy is that for life forms, survival equates to reproductive success, whilst for businesses, survival equates to risk-adjusted rate of return on investment. In both biology and businesses, evolution's search for ways to survive leads to complexity and a diversity of forms. So how does this analogy help in practical terms? Well, analogies are simply a vehicle for transferring lessons from one context to another. And since evolutionary biologists have been learning for longer than management scientists, they have some pretty interesting things to teach us. Transferring their ideas to the life sciences industry tells us three things. Firstly, it's not enough to simply note that our environment is changing. We have to understand how these changes combine to favour and disfavour particular business models. Secondly, we need to be alert to how those business models are dying off and creating ecological gaps. That's what Joe Jimenez's comments were about. He was flagging up the imminent demise of a business model that we might call research-led but value secondary. And that model has dominated our industry landscape since the Second World War. Finally, we need to understand how the fragmentation of industry business models creates its own habitat. It does this by offering a range of investment options, which invites more investment, and this niche creation is something I'll talk about in future issues of Darwin's Medicine. As in biology, the real value comes from understanding the interplay of these three factors and their implications. Firms that grasp and apply these three lessons from biological evolution and apply them to their understanding of the evolution of the industry have a chance at managing their own chances of survival. Those that don't will survive only in the industry's fossil record.